Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So this week I am talking about the third installment in the Dune series, Children of Dune. So this book, which the completion of marks my halfway point through this series, takes place 9 years after the previous book and follows Aaliyah and the twins, Paul and Chani's children. And we see what the world becomes now that Paul has left it. And we have these twin heirs who, of course, are quite remarkable people. So, Ghanima and Leto are the twins, a girl and a boy. And like Aaliyah, they are pre-born, which means they came into consciousness before they were born. And like Aaliyah, they have access to the memories and consciousness of all the people in their ancestral line and the Bene Gesserit, and they just have multitudes of people inside their heads. So mentally, they are not really like children at all, even though they are in like 9-year-old bodies. So Leto and Ghanima are very cool characters, of course. I especially like the addition of Ghanima into the plot lines. I think she is a particularly interesting character in that she has all of these abilities and a lot of the strength that Leto has, but her ultimate role in everything is very different. And of course, like their father before them, Ghanima and Leto use their skills to be one step ahead of everyone. And even as we see other characters plotting against them, I think we know the whole time that there's no way their plots could possibly be successful. They're 10 steps ahead. But there is one thing that the twins initially are very resistant to, which is to take the spice, be in a spice trance, and to try to see the future like their father did, which was his ultimate demise. Because there's certainly some danger in doing that, and we'll talk more about that in this video. But yeah, and unbeknownst to everyone else, a lot of the characters who, despite knowing better, still see them as children. Ghanima and Leto have their own plot throughout the whole book, their own scheme to get the world to the future that they believe it needs to be in, which is their, golden path. And that's completely between them, and no one else knows about it until right at the end. So one particularly interesting scene, which is kind of the first big climactic moment of the book, there are kind of two major peaks, is when a plot from the House Carino, who their house, they were the emperor's seat before Paul. They send like these special future tigers trained to kill them, which of course doesn't work. And Leto and Ghanima as children fight off these tigers, and Ghanima, despite having some pretty serious injuries, kills one of the tigers and talks about how, well, she has to be the one to do that, which is very interesting. I think it would play out well cinematically, probably. But really, ultimately, what it's about for both of the twins is that they have to make huge sacrifices in order to, save humanity from itself and sort of put right the things that went wrong under Paul's rule and under Aaliyah's rule. So for Leto, that ultimately kind of means sacrificing being a human, which we will get to. And, Ghanima, she loves her brother, and they have to take these separate paths to the point where she has to use her, mind control training to trick herself into thinking he's dead and putting herself through all of this intense grief so that she will be convincing and people will believe that he's dead. Okay, so Aaliyah. What has happened to Aaliyah in the time in between the second book and this one? Nothing good, apparently. Which is so sad. I mean, Aaliyah is the ultimate tragic character of this book, in that in the second book, I really liked her. I was really interested in where she was going to go. She had a certain volatility to her, but she was really strong and dynamic and an interesting character. And unfortunately, in this book, Aaliyah falls to Abomination, as the Bene Gesserit call it. So Abomination refers to a very specific phenomenon that can really only happen to these pre-born, these people who have all these other consciousness memory personas in their head. So essentially it's like a possession, in that one of those personalities, those complete lives that are contained within them, sort of takes over and takes control. And this happens to Aaliyah, and unfortunately the one who takes her over is Baron Harkonnen. Remember him from the first book? Yeah, he's back in a horribly insidious, sad way. And as you might recall, she is the one who kills him, so you know, the circle there. But Aaliyah is so twisted and warped, and the real Aaliyah is kind of lost inside of there. And a big conflict in this book is Ghanima and Leto's fear that they will also fall to Abomination because of all of the, you know, people in their heads, and they try really hard not to risk it. And Ghanima has some close calls with Chani's memory, actually. Chani ultimately ends up being a kind of protector, but there's some iffy moments there. And there's this, like, perhaps unnecessary part that was like, women are more susceptible to it, blah, 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 so we should be more concerned about Ghanima, but whatever. But basically it's really important for the twins to develop their own personality and figure out a way to control all of these voices in their head so that they're the ones in charge. So then Lady Jessica not being around and not being there to help Aaliyah and all of this happening, I mean, it's really sad for her as well, because she kind of abandoned her children. As we know from the last book, she was notably absent. She makes her return to Arrakis in this book, and she sees the results of that decision. And maybe she couldn't have saved Aaliyah, but I think in her mind, the fact that she doesn't know if she could have because she didn't try will probably, like, haunt her forever. Okay, so continuing on some of the themes of the second book, there's a lot of talk of the old ways, you know, how the Fremen used to be before Muad'Dib, before Paul came in and the Jihad and everything changed. You know, they're water soft now. They don't have that edge. They don't have the unity in their struggle that made them this amazing force to begin with. And under Aaliyah's rule, with Aaliyah's sort of false, empty church, some rebellious forces kind of start to form, and there are Fremen who resent how Arrakis has changed and want to go back to the desert ways. Because there was a kind of purity to all of that, and, you know, everything was so enclosed and insular on Arrakis with the Fremen people, and all of this change so quickly, I think is hard to take for a lot of the older Fremen in the book. But of course, we like the old Fremen ways. We've been taught to admire the Fremen ways. All of our main characters consider themselves essentially Fremen in their own harshness, and I don't know, there's something like an honesty to being Fremen that the wealth has sort of spoiled. And one character emerges who is kind of a voice of advocating for a return to the old ways in the preacher, who the people love and admire, love to hear him speak, and they suspect is Paul Atreides' Muad'Dib returned to them. And the preacher is very critical of Aaliyah and, you know, the great church that's been created in his name, saying that, you know, this isn't what Muad'Dib stood for, this isn't what he would have wanted, and we have to return to the way things were. And then, okay, obviously, this is all spoilers. I mean, I don't even know that I feel like I need to say that, because all my videos are, because I'm speaking under the assumption that other people have read this. Maybe they haven't, but the preacher does turn out to be Paul. But in some ways it also isn't really him, or at least not how we knew him when he left. He was in the desert for so long, and he was aged by it terribly, and now he's so afraid of the gifts that he once used that he's not really Muad'Dib anymore. He's not really the character we saw in the past couple books. So anyways, his interactions with Leto creates a whole arc between father and son, and Leto understanding and correcting what went wrong with Paul, and particularly in the way Paul viewed and interpreted the future. So then we have the Lady Jessica, who, as usual, her motives are very murky and mysterious, but she spends a significant amount of this book with Farad'n of House Carino, training him in the Bene Gesserit ways, which seems to be a way to continue the Bene Gesserit breeding program, because they want Farad'n to mate with Ghanima to sort of salvage together those genes and their whole plan that was all messed up when Paul was born. So Farad'n's a really interesting character also. House Carino are the ones that plot with the tigers to kill the twins, but Farad'n doesn't know about that plot, and then it's too late when he finds out, and he banishes his mother from the planet for it. So there are other characters who sort of try to convince the main characters that Farad'n is the villain and he's trying to come for their empire, but he doesn't really want it. He's a historian. That's where his interests lie. He never really wanted to be an emperor. And so he's sort of an interesting character in contrast with some of the other villainous, power-hungry characters that we've seen throughout the series. And then I wanted to do a quick note on Duncan, Idaho. He is the consort of Aaliyah. You know, we saw the beginnings of them being in love with each other at the end of the last book, and his arc being all wrapped up with Aaliyah is, of course, also very tragic. So pretty early on, he recognizes the abomination in Aaliyah, in that she is no longer herself, and he is heartbroken. And it changes everything for Duncan, Idaho. It changes where his loyalty lies. You know, essentially what we've known of his character this entire time is that he is loyal to the Atreides. And now Aaliyah's body is just a shell for something else. So his purpose in life is all muddled, and that's, you know, compounded with the heartbreak of him essentially believing that Aaliyah's gone, that she's dead. So Duncan becomes kind of suicidal in this book, and ultimately ends up dying at the hands of Stilgar when he provokes Stilgar to do it, in kind of his last chess move and forcing Stilgar to finally turn against Aaliyah. Okay, so a central conflict, sort of a central philosophy that comes out of this book is that seeing the future is bad, apparently. So before, when we were seeing things from Paul's point of view, there's this whole idea of fate making people unable to make their own decisions, that there's not really free will and everything's decided, and Paul was so locked into this path. But what Leto sort of uncovers is that Paul kind of created the prison for himself because he chose a path that made the other options go away. So Paul was trying so hard to control it that he locked himself into this position, not realizing that he had other options. And so Leto masters it all much better because he goes with the flow of it and sort of cooperates with it instead of trying to control it. And he actively makes decisions that keep the options open, which seems to be a very delicate balance, to not go too far one way or the other and to leave possibility open for not just him, but all of humanity. So this plays into the chaos versus order dynamics that have been thematically important in the whole series up to this point. There can't be an ultimate answer for everything. There can't be one ultimate rule that applies to everyone. Humanity can only survive in its diversity, which is what Leto's gifts allow him to see and what his mission becomes, to make sure that that diversity can be maintained so that humanity doesn't cease to exist. So another theme that arises, that has been explored in different ways throughout the series, is the role of a God figure in a society. And it sort of seems that ultimately the problem with Paul was that a religion was formed around him without him really being a god or really having the immortality power kind of control that you need to back that up. And Leto is, of course, the solution to that, and he sort of finds a way to make himself beyond human. So then that's sort of the ultimate division between him and Ghanima, is that he follows this path, and this path is clearly a burden and a difficult thing to choose to not be a human anymore. And yeah, okay, we have so many cool female characters, and the one dude rises above to be ultimately powerful. Yeah. But really, I'm okay with that because the all-knowing God character is not really an interesting character in and of himself. You don't want to be inside Leto's head. You don't want to listen to the thoughts of someone who knows everything and has it all figured out. What's interesting about having this godlike figure in the story is how all the other characters react to him. So how Aaliyah fears him when she sees the change, and how, Paul is disturbed by the choices he makes, and all of that is all much more interesting than what's going on with him. So, the female characters feel preserved in that their consciousness and their minds are the ones I'm still the most interested in. And I do wish I could have seen a little bit more into Ghanima's head in sort of the last couple scenes of the book, because that I think would have been the most interesting perspective there. Okay, so just some other random cool elements that come up in here. Jacurutu, which is kind of like this Arrakis lost city, which is an interesting concept, is another example, which we've seen in Dune before, of myth and history versus reality. It's supposedly abandoned and a forbidden place, but then we find out it's kind of just a hub for smugglers at this point. And it being forbidden among the Fremen makes it kind of a perfect hiding place for them. But getting there is sort of the start of Leto finding his golden path, getting to Jacurutu and then escaping from it. There's one scene that really stood out to me as just being, cool and interesting display of the landscape of Arrakis in Leto getting caught out during a sandstorm and basically burying himself under a dune in a little tent thing in his Fremkit tent, which was really harrowing and suspenseful, so that was cool. And then Leto's transformation. So the way Leto becomes what he becomes is that he takes on a second skin of another living organism in the sand trouts, which are like part of the worm spice life cycle. And it's kind of like a living still suit in that it like recycles his water. But it also makes him super strong, super fast, and apparently it's going to make him live like 4,000 years. So that's kind of how he becomes this god figure, someone with the power to, you know, plan humanity from, you know, this point until 4,000 years in the future and bring on a long era of peace. Okay, so let's talk about the ending. So Ghanima at the end is betrothed to Farad'n. You know, a lot of people have been scheming in this. Aaliyah's part in this scheming is that she wants Ghanima to kill him for revenge for the supposedly dead Leto. So there's all this scheming going on about that, and the betrothal itself is essentially weird because, you know, Ghanima, yes, she has like an adult mind, but it's a 9-year-old body. And then the preacher, Paul Atreides, meets a much more obvious, clear end at the end of this book, and we know he is gone now, which is another heavy blow to the Lady Jessica, because right after that we finally get the ultimate confrontation with Aaliyah and her Abomination, which is such a sad scene because you get this glimpse into what's going on in Aaliyah's head, that she's in this constant fight and struggle, and that the Aaliyah is actually still in there trying to get back control, but she can't, and her only option is to kill herself and take the Baron with her, which is like a heartbreaking moment because you feel so much pity for her as a character, especially when she had all this potential and we loved her so much. And, you know, Lady Jessica within moments has lost both of her children. So then Leto is there poised to be the emperor and to hold it for 4,000 years, adding sort of some stability to the universe. He decides to marry Ghanima, his twin, which seems unnecessary to me, but okay. I mean, Leto can't reproduce now that he's not human anymore, so like at least that element's not part of it, but still, come on. So his intention is for Farad'n to be kind of like a male concubine for Ghanima and for them to continue the bloodline under the watchful eye of Leto as he sort of conducts his own breeding program, taking over for the Bene Gesserit. And yeah, he's going to live for 4,000 years. So I'm gonna be honest, I didn't love the ending on this one. As it sounds, it was a little crazy. So despite the ending, I still think this was my favorite of the 3 books so far. I don't know if that's how I actually feel or if I'm just like way too deep in it, but yeah, I found this one really interesting. I think thematically it expands on some very cool points. There's a good amount of action and suspense and you know, really difficult, emotionally challenging scenes for these characters. All the characters are developed really well and they're all very complex, especially the women in this one. I mean, Ghanima and Lady Jessica and Aaliyah are all very complicated and all have very different motivations and sort of various levels of how morally good or bad they are at this point in their lives. Yeah, so I mean, it kind of wraps up this story of Paul and Chani and their children fairly neatly. And there are some who say, I've heard, that you should just stop here and just read the first 3 books and leave it at that. But that is not my way. And my next video will be about the 4th installment, God Emperor of Dune. I honestly think I've been reading this series for so long, I'm kind of going insane, but we're only halfway through, so here we go. And I'm sure this one will have plenty more world-ending, humanity-saving level drama. Okay, well, that's all I have to say about Children of Dune. Thanks for watching. Bye.